Okay, this video is about Melanie from Gone with the Wind. Melanie was the wife of Ashley in Gone with the Wind. She sort of was friends later with Scarlet. So this is Melanie Hamilton. Trust me, she's the best person in the whole movie Gone with the Wind. She's extraordinary. I wish I was married to her, okay? I'll show you what happened. First of all, I'd say Melanie reminds me of my mother, and that's the highest compliment I could give a woman. My mother was like a living saint. She was on the director of orphanage. She adopted a couple children. She always did the right thing no matter whether... These priests, by the way, are giants. They're like pro football players. My parents are normal-sized people, okay? But anyways, this is my mother, and I'm telling you, she's the best person I ever met in my life. And she always did the right thing no matter how much it pissed off other people or what anyone else would say. And Melanie is like that, okay? All right, also, just in order to have a good society, there's some things that really help a lot. First of all, the idea of Bible-based view of man, created in the image of God, therefore inherently part divine and deserving of respect. Okay, and then also the idea, Jesus Christ brought to the forefront on a widespread scale love and forgiveness. These principles are important because as society turns away from these things, society becomes degraded and cruel. Okay, and they're going to come up a big time in the movie Gone with the Wind. This lady, Hannah Arendt, she studied in great detail what had happened in the world in the 1930s. And one of the things she said is forgiveness is the only way to reverse the irreversible tide of history. Otherwise, it always ends up being tit for tat, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and it never ends, and it gets worse over time. And she also had said it was Jesus Christou who brought it into the world on a widespread scale, the idea of forgiveness. Okay, now here's a picture of Melanie, the Southern Belle, and in some ways she almost symbolized what was best of the South. The Southern Belle with a good Christian woman with a heart of gold, okay? This lady was so good, it's not even funny. So here is Ashley Wilkes, and he's one of the stars of the movie Gone with the Wind, stars of the book. This is the book, by the way. It's 1,000 pages. It's one of the all-time masterpieces. It's one of the top 10 books ever written. It's a masterpiece. I'm almost done with it. It's 49 audio CDs. I'm on like about CD number 36. Okay, so here is Melanie. Here's Ashley. Ashley ends up getting married to Melanie. This is Scarlet O'Hara, and she's really the main star of the movie. The book was written by Margaret Mitchell, and Margaret Mitchell is really Scarlet O'Hara. They're both Irish. They're both sort of feisty. And Scarlet's not that nice, though. Scarlet's, very beautiful, very interesting, if you will, but she's not that nice. Scarlet loves Ashley, but Ashley's decided he's going to marry Melanie. Melanie loves Ashley, okay? So Scarlet is jealous of Melanie, and Scarlet's thinking to herself, well, I'm prettier. Why doesn't he marry me? I love him, and he loves me. Why doesn't he marry me? I can tell he's attracted. All this stuff, okay? So that's happening in the background. And this kind of shows it pretty well, I think, that you can see Scarlet looking at Melanie, all jealous, looking at Ashley. But Melanie is with Ashley. Ashley's with Melanie, and that's not going to change. Okay? So it's hard for Scarlet to accept. Melanie kind of senses it. She acts like she's oblivious to it. But Melanie's very nice to Scarlet. Much nicer to Scarlet than Scarlet is to Melanie. Scarlet kind of goes around showing off, trying to get all the men interested in her, and she's trying to make Ashley jealous. She really wants Ashley to come to her. She considers these guys all a bunch of chumps. And here's Melanie, the true love of Ashley, and they're very happy together, and they're meant for each other. They're perfect together. Okay, Scarlet realizes she can't have Ashley. He's going to marry Melanie, and she's pissed off, and she yells at him, "I thought you loved me," and she slaps him in the face. There was a little bit of a concern one time that Scarlet was almost hitting on Ashley, okay? And she was forced to wear a red dress by Rhett Butler, and then he sort of abandoned her at the door, if you will, making Scarlet face a whole bunch of women who don't like her, who are jealous of her, who gossip about her all the time. And Melanie, could have turned her back on Scarlet, said, "Oh, you jerk, you flirted with my husband, you're scum, get out of here, you're not welcome in my house." But Melanie was super nice to her. It was super nice to her. Okay? And that's going to come relevant because, when Melanie had her problems, she was, pregnant and sick after childbirth and whatnot, Scarlet saved her life. And Scarlet really did good by her. And part of it was that Scarlet had promised Ashley that she would help take care of Melanie. But what I'm getting at is there's a karma in the movie, and I'm working towards something. Just so you know, this is not just random. I'm working towards something that's going to be really beautiful. I'm going to show you in a little bit here. So another big character in the movie was Clark Gable, who plays the part of Rhett Butler, Captain Rhett Butler. And a lot of the Southerners, they hate his guts because he was sort of seen as almost like a double agent. He was friends with the Confederates, but he's also friends with the Yankees. He was very brave. He had ran a bunch of supplies past the Yankee blockade to get them to the Southerners, so they liked him for that, but they saw him as a scallywag, a little bit of a, like I said, a double agent, traitor to the cause of the South. And because of that, the vast majority of Southern families would not allow Rhett Butler into their house. They did not like him, whereas Melanie was always very nice to him. She knew that a lot of things that Rhett Butler said, though controversial, skeptical, cynical, they were exactly what her husband would say to her in his letters. Her husband was Ashley Wilkes, a very bright guy, very thoughtful guy. So she knew that they were intuitive. Plus, she wasn't going to expect anybody to be perfect. She knew that Rhett Butler had been a brave, good man who'd really helped the South. And so what if he's allowed to have an opinion? So she wouldn't go against him just for conformist opinion. She told Rhett Butler, "You are always welcome in my house." And that was something my mother would do. There were a lot of people who the neighbors hated, or who the local town people hated, or who were scorned in the tennis club and other places. And my mother would always welcome them. I mean, like I said, one of the girls she welcomed, no one would have anything to do with that girl. She brought her into our house. That girl lived with us for a while. My mom was always doing stuff like that. She didn't care. We had a relative who was an alcoholic and kind of an annoying screw-up and loudmouth. My mom would bring that alcoholic lady into our house and detox her in our house. All kinds of good things like that. So Melanie was the same type of person. Whatever was right, she's going to do it. Doesn't care what anybody else says. Okay. And later on, Ashley had a problem. It's a long story. I'm not going to go into all the details of it. But Rhett Butler saved Ashley's life when Ashley got shot. Okay. So that's kind of one of the good things I see. You have a good woman. She's nice to everybody. She's fair. She's honest. And she builds long-term friendships and relationships that are mutually beneficial to everybody. Okay. So Rhett Butler was actually a very good guy, and he saved Ashley's life. Okay, now here's kind of what I was working towards. This is one of the graves here for the unknown soldier, and it says on the tombstone, unknown Confederate soldier. But you can see there's a Confederate flag and there's a Yankee Northern flag. And Melanie finally got to move back to Atlanta after, it had been destroyed by General Sherman of the Yankees in the Civil War, and most people had to abandon the place. But, a couple years later down the road, Scarlet married Frank, who lived in Atlanta, and things got arranged whereby she owned a mill and she wanted Ashley to run the mill, and this was wonderful in the opinion of Melanie because she could now move back to Atlanta where she originally was from and see all her friends. And Melanie was sort of the prototype, magnificent Southern belle, kind to everybody, and everybody loved her, and she sort of became the social center of Atlanta. Everybody wanted to be with Melanie, wanted to talk to her, wanted her blessing on whatever important thing they were doing. And there were different societies of the women in the Confederate society. And one of them was the ladies' sewing circle, another was the ladies of beautification. And they would sometimes meet together, and they'd sometimes argue about things. Okay, so I'm going to read you something from the book. And it's a rather extraordinary passage here. So Melanie had been made secretary for both the Association for the Beautification of the Graves of Our Glorious Dead and the Sewing Circle for the Widows and the Orphans of the Confederacy. This new honor came to her after an exciting joint meeting of those societies, which had threatened to end in violence and the severance of lifelong ties of friendship. The question had arisen at the meeting as to whether or not weeds should be removed from the graves of the Union soldiers near those of the Confederate soldier. The appearance of the scraggly Yankee mounds, now we're in Confederate territory around Atlanta, remember that, defeated all the efforts of the ladies to beautify those of their own dead. Immediately, the fires which smoldered beneath the tight basques flamed wildly, and two organizations split up and glared hostilely. The sewing circle was in favor of the removal of the weeds, and the ladies of the beautification were violently opposed. Miss Meade, from the ladies of beautification, growled as she said, "Dig up the weeds off Yankee graves. For 2 cents, I'd dig up all the Yankees and throw them in the city dump." At these ringing words, the two associations arose, and every lady spoke her mind, and no one listened. The meeting was being held in Miss Merriweather's parlor, and Grandpa Merriweather, who had been banished to the kitchen, reported afterwards that the noise sounded just like the opening guns of the Battle of Franklin. And he added, he guessed it was a dinged sight safer to be present at the Battle of Franklin than at the ladies' meeting. Somehow Melanie made her way to the center of the excited throng, and somehow she made her usually soft voice heard above the tumult. Her heart was in her throat with fright at daring to address the indignant gathering, and her voice shook, but she kept crying, "Ladies, please," till the din died down. Melanie said, I've thought for a long time that not only should we pull up the weeds, but we should plant flowers on. I don't care what you think, but every time I go to take flowers to dear Charlie's grave," Charlie was her brother who was killed in the Civil War. He actually died right before the beginning of the battle. I always put some on the grave of an unknown Yankee, which is nearby. It looks so forlorn." The excitement broke out again in louder words, and this time the two organizations merged and spoke as one. "On Yankee graves? Oh, Melly, how could you? And they killed Charlie. They almost killed you. Why, the Yankees might have killed Bo, your baby, when he was born. And they tried to burn you out. They tried to burn down Tara." Melanie held back on her chair for support, almost crumpling beneath the weight of disapproval that she had never known before. "Oh, ladies," she cried, pleading, "please let me finish. I know I haven't the right to speak on this matter, for none of my loved ones were killed except for Charlie, and I know where he lies, thank God. But there are so many among us today who do not know where their sons and husbands and brothers are buried, and—" She choked, and there was a dead silence in the room. Mrs. Meade's flaming eyes went somber. She had made the long trip to Gettysburg after the battle to bring back her son Darcy's body, but no one had been able to tell her where he was buried. Somewhere in some hastily dug trench in the enemy country, and Miss Allen's mouth quivered. Her husband and brother had been on that ill-starred Morgan raid made into Ohio, and the last information she had of them was that they had fallen on the banks of the river, just as the Yankee cavalry stormed up. She did not know where they lay. Mrs. Allison's son had died in a northern prison camp, and she, the poorest of the poor, was unable to bring his body home. There were others who had read on casualty lists, missing, believed dead, and in those words had learned the last news they were ever to learn of the men they had seen march away. They turned to Melanie with their eyes that said, "Why do you open these wounds again? These are the wounds that never heal, the wounds of not knowing where they lie." Melanie's voice gathered strength in the stillness of the room. "Their graves are somewhere up in Yankees' country, just like the Yankee graves are here. And oh, how awful it would be to know that some Yankee woman said to dig them up and—" Miss Meade made a small, dreadful sound. "But how nice it would be to know that some good Yankee woman— and there must be some good Yankee women, I don't care what people say, they can't all be bad— how nice it would be to know that they had pulled weeds off our men's graves and brought flowers to them, even if they were enemies. If Charlie were dead in the North, it would comfort me to know that someone— and I don't care what you ladies think of me." Her voice broke again. "I will withdraw from both clubs, and I'll pull up every weed off every Yankee's grave I can find, and I'll plant flowers too. And I just dare anyone to stop me." With this final defiance, Melanie burst into tears and tried to make her stumbling way to the door. Grandpa Merriweather, safe in the masculine confines of the Girl of the Period saloon, an hour later, reported Uncle Henry Hamilton that after these words everybody cried and embraced Melanie, and it ended up in a love feast, and Melanie was made the secretary of both organizations. And they are all going to pull up the weeds. The hell of it is that Dolly said I'd only be too pleased to help her do it, 'cause I didn't have anything else much to do. I got nothing against the Yankees, and I think Miss Melly was right, and the rest of us lady wildcats were wrong. But the idea of me pulling up weeds at this time of my life with my lumbago, Melanie was also on the board of lady managers at the Orphans Home and assisted with the collection of books for the newly formed Young Men's Library Association. Okay, so the reason I read that and went through that is, and I'll show you the next slide. I could have gone to the next slide, actually would have been better. Here's Melanie, here's the soldier's grave, is because you need somebody like that who's big enough to turn it all around. So that's the only way things will ever get better. And yes, it's a little hard to do that at first, but it's beautiful and it's good. And that's why I love Melanie, and she's my favorite character in Gone with the Wind, and I hope that was interesting.